Hello and welcome to the Majlis podcast, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's current affairs talk show focusing on Central Asia. I'm Bruce Pannier, host of the Majlis and author of the weekly Central Asia in Focus newsletter. On July 1st and 2nd last year, there was violence in western Uzbekistan's Karakalpak sovereign republic after proposed amendments to the Constitution of the Republic. Among the proposed changes, there were amendments that deprived Karakalpakstan of its long-standing nominal sovereign status and right to secede from Uzbekistan. That sparked protests that turned violent when Uzbek police and security forces moved to disperse the large crowd that was rallying outside the administration building in the Karakalpakstan capital, Nukus. Officially, 21 people were killed in the unrest that followed. The first round of trials connected to the violence in Karakalpakstan ended on January 31st, with all 22 defendants being found guilty. One of the defendants died 4 days later. There have been many questions about the investigation, the court proceedings, and the sentences that were just handed down. And to discuss the Karakalpakstan trials, I am joined by Alisher Ilkhamov, director of the Central Asia Due Diligence, who has written many articles about Uzbekistan, including 3 articles since December about the trials of protesters in Karakalpakstan that are all posted on Central Asia Due Diligence, one word, centralasiaduediligence.uk. And Steve Swerdlow, a rights lawyer who has spent many years focusing on Central Asia and is currently an associate professor of the practice of human rights at the University of Southern California. Thank you both for joining me. And Alisher, I'd start with you if I could. Was there anything surprising to you about the outcome of the first round of the Karakalpakstan trials?
Yes, hello. Just for clarification, these 3 articles were first published by Anti-Discrimination Center, Memorial. The first was under their order, and then actually we continued kind of reporting in order to provide some analysis for this, first of all, of the events themselves. And at the beginning of July, then what kind of indictment the prosecutor office brought against these 22, and finally the verdict was published a few days ago. Yeah, so to talk about the outcome, the verdict, I don't think anything was kind of surprising. It was some kind of the expectations with very little hope that the government will go for some kind of compromise, maybe just sentence them, but immediately kind of pardon. Because this kind of the conviction of these people, for the moment, 17 of these 22 are going to kind of serve this sentence in prison. And 5, as you probably know, that were as a kind of giving kind of provisional term, actually, or the kind of they changed the status of not to stay in the prison, but once again, so it's kind of provisional sentence. But because this conviction is going against even the long-term interests of regime, because if they kind of continue these repressions and crack down on this kind of protests, which were sparked and provoked by the government itself when they, without any consultations, decided to change the constitutional norms, which provided some kind of very symbolic right of the Karakalpakstan to secede, to exit from Uzbekistan, if the majority of population would vote for that. So this totally was provoked by the government, and so the protests were not surprising. So now, if they continue this line of suppression, then actually one can expect as a quite possible scenario, the developments go along the scenario very similar to Kosovo. Because in the Kosovo, which started in 1981, it was very small scale protest, but the government responded very harsh by kind of suppressing, persecuting, and also killing people, and then actually launched this kind of the spiral kind of development, which eventually brought this case to the full independence of Kosovo from Serbia. So something similar can happen actually practically in Uzbekistan, and this actually the government itself, the authorities themselves, are contributing to this kind of scenario in Uzbekistan. I absolutely don't have any kind of illusion about the decision having been made by the the presidential office, not by the court, because the court is still in Uzbekistan. Judiciary is not independent, so most likely it was kind of brought from the top, and they announced this decision. So that's my guess, and I think it was decided on the top by the government with very small kind of compromise, very negligible of kind of by releasing from the prison, from this kind of prison centers, there's only 5 people, while the rest, around 70 people, were convicted, and Tajim Muratov is going to serve 16 years. Despite all the kind of the indictment points were absolutely politically motivated, absurd, and going against even the constitution of Uzbekistan, not to say about international law.
Okay, thank you. And, just to give our audience a little bit more information about who was on trial, Steve, I'm going to turn to you. You tell me a little bit about Daulat Murat, Tajim Muratov, and Lulugul Kalikhanova. And they received the harshest sentences, and yet Tajim Muratov is going to prison, and Kalikhanova is she's guilty, but she's not going to prison. Can you tell us a little bit about the characters or the people involved in the trials?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Laligul Khalikhanova is a journalist, and she, in the process of Karakalpak civil society reacting to these proposed amendments to strip the sovereign status of the Republic of Karakalpakstan, she led discussions. She had a popular Telegram channel which was discussing the constitutional rights, the rights under the Constitution of Uzbekistan, to protest, again, peacefully. She discussed the legality. She was one of the people that was engaging in this really important dialogue. And again, we have to put this in context that this is several years into a process whereby the government and the president, most prominently, have repeatedly at least tried to emphasize in many public speeches that this was not Islam Karimov's Uzbekistan. This was a so-called new Uzbekistan, where dialogue with the people was supposed to be a fundamental principle. Whether or not Laligul Kalikhanova, was naive or was strategic, it's hard to understand. But she was leading a Telegram channel that had many thousands of people on it, and she was calling for a discussing the legality of these amendments. She was quickly arrested for having that discussion. Daulat Tajim Muratov was a well-known blogger, a lawyer, and he had long really been a thorn in the side of Karakalpakstan's authorities. Had public, not feuding, but he had raised concerns about corruption on the part of several officials in Karakalpakstan, and he was a really respected figure in the Karakalpak community. There are videos where we can see in the days of the protest on July 1st. First of all, what's really important to note here is that he called for peaceful protests. There's several references to that. There's really no evidence of a call to violence. And if you look and see the way people reacted to him, the way he was treated, and the issue, of course, of his very detention was what sparked much of the violence on July 1st. It really shows what sort of figure he was, what sort of figure he is, and now, following this conviction, I think in many ways, and as Alisher really brilliantly stated, by doing this, by conducting the trial in this way, and by giving these sentences that are so harsh, 16 years, including under Article 159, which was one of President Karimov's favorite charges for going after political opponents and dissidents, what the government has done is, really made a martyr in a sense, or transformed Tajim Muratov into an even more powerful symbol of these underlying issues of Karakalpakstan's status and all the issues that go along with that were fueling these protests, such as the right to have an education in the Karakalpak language, all the economic issues, the environmental issues, the issues of local government, autonomy, of the way resources are drawn up and divvied up. These are things that people like Tajim Muratov and Kalikhanova were, they were important mediators of these really important discussions. And as Alisher said, Laligul, her role in this trial was absolutely. It was really important. If you argue that this was a very stage managed process, the Uzbek government really got the result that they wanted at the end of this, when Lalagul expressed contrition and was in tears, not just at the end, but during the trial. She gave, tearful statements in which she expressed apologies, in which she did still make some references to official inaction, sort of pointing the finger implicitly at local officials for not doing enough. But more or less, I think she said what the government wanted her to say, which was take responsibility away from the government for the way they handled this and place it on the protesters, which is really, again, there's this cognitive dissonance about the severity of what happened. 21 people killed, mass protests larger than perhaps even the Andijan protests of 2005, and to place all that blame on these 22 individuals, and now the new trial of 39 more individuals that began this week, it just does not add up. And so while the government got the result they wanted in some sense in the short term, I think, as Alisher just said, they planted the seeds for further problems down the road.
Yes, by the way, this sorry for interruption. So the 21 is according to the official data reports, but according to more independent kind of sources, 77 at least were killed. So that was not something reported by the kind of dissidents or by those dissidents in exile, but by the medical personnel in Nukus. And it was a report cited by the local press, by Gazeta.uz.
Yeah, I think that's an important observation that Alisher makes, which is that after this long trial, which lasted 2 months, and a lot of attention was paid or was made by government observers to the supposed openness of the trial, which really included. We can go into more of the specifics of the trial, but it was reported that the trial was going to be live streamed and was open to the public, but in actuality, we really only saw about 5 days or so of it live streamed. But amidst this supposed openness of the trial, there's still no official list of the names of the dead, as Alisher has said, which again is at the very heart of this, is this question of who died, who did what to whom, when, where, and how.
No,
that was for an interest of the political regime to disclose the names of the policemen who ostensibly died, actually were killed, but they didn't. So it's kind of putting some doubts on whether it was really the case that the policemen, actually the law enforcement, some of them actually were killed.
This is good. Thank you. And we're going to come back to all these points. I want to paint as clear a picture as possible for our audience. Steve, you mentioned that they were live streaming the trial, but then they stopped. Am I right that the last person that gave testimony during the live stream was actually Taji Muratov, right?
I believe so, but we didn't see all of that, and there were a lot of concerns about whether or not the restriction of live streaming was due to critical remarks. I mean, Taji Muratov was amazing in the sense that he spoke of ill treatment and highly worrying concerns of torture while in detention. I mean, he was the only person that did not play the part that you could say that the Uzbek government would have wanted.
Yes, he at the last moment he requested for allocation a special day, the separate day to give them the floor for his last speech, and I don't know whether they gave him or not, but he spoke, I think, around 1.5 hours. And actually, I would just praise him for this, not only for kind of being a courageous person who didn't kind of admitted he's guilty. Actually, largely, he maybe admitted maybe very few points of indictments, but largely he didn't admit he's guilty. And so he was quite professional. He's, by the way, by his professional background, is a lawyer. And he acted quite professionally along the whole process of this trial. So asking the questions to kind of the whole who were kind of reporting against him. So unfortunately, some of these defendants started kind of making accusations against him, most likely kind of due to the some kind of deal behind the door with investigation. So speak something, report something against Taji Muratov, and we'll do our best to kind of to make easier to your sentence. So, he was one of the very few who actually acted and behaved quite worthy. But at the same time, he was, as I said, professional, and he kind of provided a number of very serious, convincing, actually, counter arguments against indictments. And in fact, he himself proved that the whole indictment was just falsified, kind of fabricated against him.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to get into a little bit about the trial process here too, and I'll start with you, Alisher. I was reading one of the reports that came out of Gazeta.uz, and they had asked one of the relatives of one of the people who had been convicted for their, some comments, and this relative, who of course was kept anonymous, said they were all charged with the same thing, but some people got let go, and some people got 3 years, and then some people, Taji Muratov got 16 years. How do you make sense of that? Did this kind of show that they were really, from the start, the court was out to get specifically Taji Muratov and Kalihanov?
There is a kind of a lot of absurdity in all this kind of the points of indictment against all these defendants. For instance, starting with Taji Muratov himself, the one of the key points of the indictment was kind of trying to combine two different chapters of the criminal code. Very ridiculously, actually, one sentence, one chapter through another one. So eventually, probably they understood that it was quite absurd, so they abandoned at the end. In this final verdict, they dropped that point, this argument. So yes, indeed, others actually received different sentences, which were with reference to the same chapter on the criminal code. My guess is because it was kind of was due to some negotiation behind the door. Actually, you do something on the kind of during this trial, maybe making some accusations of Taji Muratov, putting all the kind of burden of responsibility upon him. In order to get some easier kind of sentence against this kind of defendants. So probably due to this different kind of agreements between the authorities in investigation and the defendants, they came up with these different sentences with reference to the same, as I said, chapter of the criminal code.
Okay, thanks. And we are about at the halfway point. So that is time for me to remind that this is the Majlis podcast, Radio for Europe, Radio Liberty's current affairs talk show focusing on Central Asia. I'm Bruce Pannier, host of the Majlis and author of the weekly Central Asia in Focus newsletter. And I am joined today by Steve Swerdlow, a rights lawyer who has spent many years focusing on Central Asia and is currently an associate professor of the practice of human rights at the University of Southern California, and Alisher Ilkhamov, director of Central Asia Due Diligence, who has written many articles about Uzbekistan, including 3 recent articles since December about the trials of the protesters. And he gave us another website that you can find it on, those 3 articles on, but I will repeat that those 3 articles are also available on centralasiaduediligence.uk. We're talking about the trials of Karakalpakstan protesters. The first round has ended, but a new one with 39 defendants is just beginning. Alisher, can you tell me who these 39 people are?
I have no idea. Some kind of participants, but for the moment they didn't. They just provided a list of those people, but without kind of clarification what reason for they were kind of brought to the court. Actually, we still, there is some latest report that they finally kind of convicted, not convicted, but they brought some charges against 3 representatives of the law enforcement. Probably responding to this criticism that so many people were killed, and there was some evidence they used the guns, kind of not just the instruments for kind of regulating or kind of some misbehavior by the protesters, but kind of used the guns to kill some people. Some grenades, some pieces of grenade, and some in the body, in the head. So there was some kind of evidence of that actually, and so they didn't have any kind of the choice but to present some evidence that also bringing some charges against the law enforcement. But it's 3 people. They didn't name them for the moment, unfortunately, and so it's unclear where they will actually brought to the court.
Right, and just to add, to answer your question, Bruce, about this new group of 39, among them, there are said to be 2 reporters, One of them is Abdi Malik Hojanazarov, who he's the chief editor of a paper called El Hizmetinde, and he's accused of publishing articles containing separatist themes. But again, it's a potpourri of the types of charges that have already been raised in the first trial: violence, arson, vandalism, rioting, and it's always released in a fashion where it's very difficult to understand the underlying facts. And there's still really just a lack of transparency with regard to the investigation. Much of the video that we know, the CCTV footage that was taken during the days of the protest, much of that still hasn't been released. So we're just getting bits and pieces. And as Alisher said, we don't know enough about the three law enforcement officers, what rank they held, what decisions they made. And this has taken 7 months to release the names of the three law enforcement officers. But of course, that is significant. It seems to be, in my opinion, that the announcement of those charges is a reaction to the pressure and the continued scrutiny on this process. And it's of course important that this happened, but again, it seems there's so many missing pieces here, from the names of the dead to what we know about the law enforcement officials, to the videos, to now this news of the death in custody of someone who was part of the first trial, who was convicted of 6 years, Polat Shamsetov, who died, and there's also a lot of questions surrounding his death.
And that's perfect. Thank you very much for helping me with that transition, because I didn't want to forget to talk about him. Alisher, this is not just I hate to use the word ordinary. I mean, but Shamshetov has some distinctions from the other defendants, the people that were just convicted. I mean, he died 4 days later, but he's not, for lack of a better way to put it, not just another Karakalpak. He's actually got a historical link, or his father certainly, to the region. Can you talk about him a little? Polat Shamshetov.
Polat Shamshetov is the son of the Davletbay Shamshetov, who was reportedly the first and the last president of Karakalpakstan. First, on the beginning of 1991, he was elected the chairperson of the Supreme Council, the Parliament of Karakalpakstan. But there was some report. Unfortunately, I tried to find the evidence, kind of reference to the specific publications. I couldn't find it actually. But if you go to the Wikipedia and also the media reports, for instance, by Gazeta.uz, they saying that he was the first president. So ostensibly in November 1991, he was probably likely elected not by the in general elections, but through by the Supreme Court, by the Parliament, as a first president. There was a period of so-called the parade of sovereignty, when the many kind of former Soviet republics, both the Union republics and the autonomous republics, tried to use the opportunity to acquire the full independence. Karakalpakstan was one of them, because the mass conscience among the Karakalpaksaks was quite very high due to this ecological environmental disaster the republic suffered during the late Soviet period. And so there was a number of local civil society organizations quite prominent who joined this environmental movement. It was eventually was expanded to the mass movement for greater independence at that time. So the Davletbay, Shamshetov probably realized it also opportunity for himself to get acquitted, and he created, established his own party. But already on the following year, because it was the very this introduction in of this new position of president was a challenge to Uzbekistan, to Karimov, who couldn't tolerate the two presidents in the country. It's one president of Uzbekistan, another is of Karakalpakstan, with evident, with probably intention. He suspected the Karakalpaks wanted and headed by this Davletbay Shamshetov to succeed from Uzbekistan. So he used all means. First of all, law enforcement, the violent means, in order to force Shamshetov to resign on the following year, 1992. And then actually they brought to the the position of the chairperson of and the very position of president was abandoned totally. So they returned back to this position of the chairperson of the Supreme Council. And they kind of managed to promote their own person who is loyal to Tashkent. But now, kind of in the kind of public memory, they're still kind of memorizing those times, and Shamshadov is very much associated with the very idea of independence and the sovereignty of Karpakstan. And so that's why his son has probably become a kind of a symbolic figure. Even if he didn't intend to take a lead of this movement, that maybe people were expecting for him to take this lead. So he's claiming that he just went to the street to see what is going on, but he didn't have any intention to lead this movement, his protest. But regardless of that, probably those Uzbek authorities decided that he's a very dangerous figure. Because it's very much associated as a symbol with the very idea of independence. So they arrested him, and brought to to this court. And I don't know, giving this kind of in line, all this kind of developments and the motivation to his death looks a little bit suspicious to me. What is really behind this case? Whether it was indeed kind of heart attack, as official authorities reporting, or maybe it was something else.
Thank you, and that's good because this gets me to Steve. This is for you. This question brings us kind of over to the larger point, but the preliminary findings of the doctor were that, I'm sure you probably saw this too, that Shamshetov smoked too much, and he was under a lot of stress, and the combination ended up being the reason that killed him. And of course, our friend Muzaffar Selimanov said, could the stress have come from him actually being imprisoned and being recently convicted? But we've all of us have watched the trials in Uzbekistan going back to the Bad Karimov days, the Andijan massacre and stuff. So this really raises a question. Here's this prominent figure in Karakalpak society, someone who could be a potential leader. He's convicted. He dies in prison. Hasn't even made it to prison. Still in custody. He dies 4 days later. You said at the start of the show that we hear about the new Uzbekistan, but does this trial process, does it look different from the old days? And if so, how?
Bruce, it's one of those questions that forces everyone that has been, in a way, cheerleading the reform process. I think it's, to take a really hard look at what's happening. Of course, there are differences between the trials after the Andijan massacre, for example, which were, first of all, not live streamed. The technology is one of the differences between 2005 and 2023. And, there was a much cruder way that the government at that time went about pressuring observers, restricting observers. At the time, detaining, when I was working for Human Rights Watch, detaining our own colleague during that period and after. So this trial, yes, it was characterized in some ways by some aspects of openness. Of course, it was great that the Economist correspondent Joanna Lillis was there, Nabahor Imamova from the Voice of America was there. But notably, despite multiple requests, the government did not, and not even the parliamentary commission, this independent commission, we can talk about that, didn't really engage in real time with the questions that international human rights organizations had, human rights observers like myself had, and we sought to be involved, we sought to engage in this process, and we were really not able to do so. In fact, we saw, I'm not sure exactly what day it was, but in the very recent weeks, we saw the independent commission hit back at statements that were made by Human Rights Watch. And when I read this press release from the independent commission, it really did remind me of an earlier period in the way that they were angrily reacting to criticism rather than engaging with that criticism, rather than answering these questions like who died, who did what to whom, when, where, and how. More energy, and in fact, a lot of resources seem to be spent on this stage management, on this appearance of openness, rather than a meaningful, transparent investigation in which you would answer the questions that we've been raising. So I think the trial leaves observers like myself incredibly uncomfortable about where this is going, and there are so many unresolved issues. Of course, what the constitutional referendum was aiming at its heart to do, which was reset the clock for the president. to be able to run again for another 2 terms. These issues really, they strike at the very heart of this narrative. And I think that the only way to resolve those questions would be for the president, to answer questions, to hold a press conference. But we haven't seen that those sorts of things really since the very beginning. Even in the most open year of the reform process, 2017, 2018, we didn't see that type of engagement. But now I think, yes, this trial is a real milestone in the wrong direction for for the changes that we've seen in Uzbekistan.
To the best of your knowledge, has President Mirziyoyev even commented on the trials? I mean, he was, obviously said a lot in July, right after it happened, but has he said anything since?
I haven't seen any reports of him commenting on the trial. Have you, Alisher?
No, I haven't seen, but his kind of behavior during those events was quite kind of contradictory. On the one hand, he made kind of right decision to recall the draft amendments, which were the cause of this protest, but at the same time, the government tried to block all kind of internet and the mobile internet, so very few people would have be informed on time about this kind of decision to recall those draft amendments. So the people can still were driving to the streets. Many of them probably were not knowing about this decision. So first of all, blocking this information communication. And second, immediately trying to pacify by using the force. He probably gave the instruction, order to restore the order within maybe 1-2 days, not tolerating the longer process. While he had a choice to give some time to get them the moods to be pacified, calmed down during maybe longer period of time, and that actually would be bringing to less casualties and the deaths. But now his decision probably to immediately to restore the order, in his understanding, they created a problem. The second problem. The first was the draft amendment, and the second is the intention to restore the order immediately within 1-2 days. He succeeded in this respect, but it was at the very high cost for the Karakalpakstan and even for the whole Uzbekistan. So even not saying anything in the public, you by your behavior you sending certain messages. Well, one message was just let's strike the compromise, and the second message, let's put everything in order, and without considering the cost.
Okay, thank you. But I also want to get your impressions, your comments on this trial. And does it differ from the ones we saw in Karimov's era? You had all the defendants almost, except for Taji Muratov, confessed that they said they were guilty, asked for forgiveness for what they did. Some of the defendants actually went after the principal defendant that the government really wanted, Taji Muratov. We talked about Andijan, but we could go even further back. The Tashkent bombings in 1999 and the trials that followed that. It also characterized by this same kind of testimony from defendants, confessing guilt, implicating other people that the government had targeted or designated as the ringleaders. Is there anything different about these trials than the ones during the Karimov era?
Once again, getting back to this Andijan events, I agree with Steve. Indeed, actually, there is the main difference is the more openness, actually, more freedom of press, which is should be acknowledged. So the whole Mirziyoyev presidency actually distinguished by the more the freedom of press, and the very fact that most of information I received about the trial not from the foreign media, not from Fergana.ru or from the Azad League, but from the local mass media outlet, from Gazeta.uz and or Kun.uz. So this is some achievements indeed, and the second is commission in the so-called independence. I put actually in the comma, because the so-called independent commission was dominated by the MPs who are themselves representing this rather puppet parties. So I don't have any illusions about what would be the result of this involvement of this so-called independent commission. But still, symbolically, it's important to have at least such a commission. But to one kind of be fair to build some parallels with Andijan from the following three criteria. First of all, the events there and here actually were provoked by the government themselves, by authorities themselves. In Andijan, they tried to put in prison those businessmen representing this Akrami kind of community without any kind of evidence. It was politically motivated kind of trial. And here too, actually, this draft amendment. So it got totally provoked by the government. Secondly, absence of due process and the justice. So in both cases, we see the kind of trials which are kind of politically motivated, very arbitrary kind of indictments brought against them. And the third is that those kind of the harsh sentences to this given to these people. So from this point of view, kind of some parallels, some comparisons are quite justified. Well, some people on the ground disagree. I had some kind of discussion with some people. There's some claiming that it's absolutely different from those events in Andijan. But I think according at least 2-3 criteria, it will be quite fair to make these parallels.
Okay, thank you. Steve, is it fair to call this a show trial? What's happening with the Karakalpak protesters?
I'd say highly orchestrated, and I do agree with Alisher on this point of the press, and it is notable. I mean, Gazeta Uz, Kun Uz, they've continued to do their job as best as they possibly can, and that was it a show trial? I think certain aspects of it were. I think certainly these, it's just uncanny, and it raises too many questions that 21 out of 22 defendants would point the finger at one, even if you just looked at the body language, if you looked at the way people were sitting. I think in particular, there was the athlete on trial in the first trial, Azamat Turdanov, who had rallied to Taji Muratov's defense during the events, during the days of the protests, and had sort of protected him and been such an important sort of supporter of this process. He points the finger at Taji Muratov and says it was all him. I mean, that made me deeply uncomfortable because it was obvious that the pressure on the defendants was unprecedented. And that's not to say that in any criminal justice system and in any criminal trial, obviously there's going to be pressure, but there were concerns from the beginning, and especially let's focus on what's most important, which is concerns of ill treatment and torture, which Taji Muratov says at one point during the trial. He says, they sat on our heads and we lost consciousness. And the fact that you had that happening, and at the same time, as Alisher has helpfully pointed out, in the independent commission, yes, you had voices that, again, this is another difference with Andijan, I guess you could say, the fact that you had Azam Farmonov, a former political prisoner himself, who I know very well, who was imprisoned in Karakalpakstan for something ranging on 9 years. He is part of this commission. He knows Karakalpakstan well. That's important. But at the same time, the independent commission's statements were mirroring and incredibly parallel and almost not different at all than what the government was doing and saying, what the executive branch was saying, what the prosecutor general's office was saying. And so that aspect of stage management, of coordination, I think that should make us uncomfortable. I think that should make us very uncomfortable, because what an independent commission is supposed to do is really answer questions, create space for dialogue. And there was this sense throughout this process of most of these voices, including the commission, saying, we've answered your questions, stop asking questions, everything is fine, everything is okay. And so I think there are some complex processes underway here, and I do believe that some of the people in that process, in that commission, we're trying to work towards more transparency. But the strongest forces, the determinative forces here at the end of the day, I think are, in the security forces, the prosecutor general, and ultimately, again, at the highest level of the Uzbek government, that I think wanted a certain result.
Sorry, one additional point, if I may. Just probably the government wanted to make this trial a kind of a show trial, by providing some openness and transparency, broadcasting from the court room. That was was promising to be indeed such a kind of good show in terms of at least openness, and kind of giving opportunities to everyone in the kind of among the defenders the floor, to opportunity to speak up and so on. But at a certain point, as already Steve mentioned, actually they decided to stop broadcasting very unexpectedly. In my understanding, it was because some kind of compromising details, where the details compromising for the government was revealed when the Tajimuratov started speaking about torture he suffered from the law enforcement, while the government tried to, and the so-called independent commission tried to make a point there was no independence, no mistreatment, there were no complaints during this people being in custody. But what the Tajimuratov reported was contradicting to these claims. He said that he himself was tortured at least twice, heavily beaten. And so my understanding, my guess is that after this kind of revelations, and also his report, that when he read the material of investigation, he also saw the kind of references to the cases when the people were killed by gunshot, or by grenade. So these two kind of the evidence which appeared and during this court hearing were kind of very much compromising for the government. So my guess is that they decided to stop broadcasting due to this reason. So that's why. So one hardly can kind of claim this is really a show, because it's so failed show for the government, because eventually there was kind of big gap in terms of transparency.
Right. And Bruce, I don't know to what extent this is, I'm not posing a direct connection between the trial and this, but, we also had happening during the trial, in Tashkent, which is certainly not in Bukhara, but in Tashkent, you had actually a raid and detention of a number of journalists, including journalists from this outlet named Human.uz, which was, again, we're still waiting for more facts. These journalists were raided for so-called, the charges of extortion, looks like financial crimes. But that still is, that's something that we hadn't seen yet, in this number of people being detained over the past several years. And of course, we think back a year or so ago to the blogger Otabek Satori, who was given a prison sentence. And so steadily but surely, there seems to be, and this trial, I think, unfortunately, has to be put in that ledger of a return to, to older habits in Uzbekistan, unfortunately.
Wow. Well, yeah, I have to agree with that. There's a lot more we could say about this, but unfortunately, we are out of time at the moment. I'm sure we're going to be returning to this topic again very soon. So I hope I have you both. I'm sure I'll have you both back on the program again. But I'd like to thank you both. Thank you, Alisher, and thank you, Steve, for being on the program. And a big thank you to Nathan Shoemaker, our Mejlis podcast producer in Washington, D.C., and a reminder, you can subscribe to the Mejlis podcast or the Central Asia in Focus newsletter by visiting Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's website at rfarl.org. Thank you very much. We'll be back next week. Bye-bye.